But hey, so we're picking up in our text this morning. We've been walking through 1 Samuel, looking at the lives of David and Saul, and this morning we're going to look at an episode in David's life where he gets some really, really good advice. And so we're going to focus on the person that gives him the advice. It's a woman named Abigail. But before we get to her, we were thinking about like advice. Okay, and really when you think it's Mother's Day, like moms have really good advice. And so we have a group on Facebook called New Life Community Life. And if you want to be part of this stuff in the future, you're probably going to want to join that group. But I just posed the question, like, what's the best advice your mom ever gave you? And we got about 60 responses. And so I can't read all of them. I'm just going to read 5 of them. And if you're mad that yours isn't up there, the teaching team, they made the decision. It wasn't me. Take it out with that faceless group, the teaching team. They will handle it. But these are a few of our favorites. The first one this is from Lauren Meineke. It says, "My mom always said to wear clean underwear in case you got in an accident." I just want, like, when is it not okay to wear clean underwear? I would just say, like, always wear clean underwear. End of sentence. I don't know. That's just me. I'm not a mom, so I don't know. Maybe that's the deal. All right, the next one. Rebecca Lawal said, "Would you lick it? If it's not clean enough for you to lick it, then you better go back and do it again. I now use this with people and still giggle when it slips out of my mouth. That's gross." But it works. Like if it works, it works. Okay, next one. This is from Kimberly Ann. And she says, if you wouldn't send it to Mama, don't text it to anyone or put it on the internet. I feel like we need to send that back to the youth group, right? Like, hey, you guys, the internet is forever. Like, be careful what you say. People who you want to work for someday, they will pull up your Facebook profile. But the caveat is if Mama is really raw, then it doesn't apply. But we'll just assume that she's not. All right, next one. This is from Miranda Bake. Okay, this one, like, I'm going to say this when she's here, okay? But this one, okay, she said, "My mom always said life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get." Okay, Forrest Gump's mom said that, right? Like, she said that. She said, life's like a box of chocolate. She said, stupid is a stupid does. She says a lot of things, but it's Forrest Gump's mom, but still it's a good piece of advice. Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Sometimes it's coconut and gross, and sometimes it's not. So that's good. Okay, and this last one's like, we say, okay, in teaching team, everyone's like, it's gross, but it's true. Catching vomit in your hand. This is from Chelsea Henry. What's up, Chelsea? Catching vomit in your hand seems silly, but it saves so much cleanup later. No one wants to admit that they do it, but everyone's like, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. I'm not gonna do it. I'm just gonna let my wife clean it up after Mother's Day. But this morning we're coming to a text, okay? And you got David. And if you're kind of new to us, you're kind of catching up where we are in the story. We are picking up in the middle of the story. But really all that you need to know at this point is that David's at a place in his life where he's on the run. That there's a king in Israel. He's a man named Saul. And what we know of him is that he's wicked. And he hates David. He hates David so much that at this point in David's life, he is just trying to find a way to stay alive. And so he goes all over the place trying to figure out a way to stay alive. And this is one of those episodes where David is on the run from King Saul. He is a fugitive in his homeland. And we'll pick up the story here in 1 Samuel chapter 25. And we'll start here in verse 1. It says this. It says, "Then David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel." Now, this isn't like, he isn't a worther. His business is located in Carmel. He doesn't sell Carmel, though that would be a great business to be involved in. It says, "The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now, the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife was Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and behaved badly. He was a Calebite." Now, what the author is doing here is he's setting the stage for the story. He wants us to meet the characters and kind of understand them a little bit better. And so what we need to know is, first off, we need to know Abigail. And we'll talk about her in detail towards the end, but what we know about her is that she's discerning and beautiful. And she's a discerning, beautiful woman who ended up marrying someone named Nabal. And here's what you need to know about Nabal. His name means fool, and he lives up to it. Like this story is a story where Nabal lives up to his name, that his name is fool, and he does as fools do. Which is kind of interesting when we think of the word fool, because in our like culture, fool doesn't have a lot of weight to it. Like you can be like, oh, you're a silly fool, or you think of a fool, you think of kind of like a court jester, or even like you think of Mr. T saying like, I pity the fool. Like you think of, it doesn't have that weight to it. But in the Hebrew, the idea of someone being a fool is this idea that this person is materialistic, that he's unnecessarily vicious. And even the idea like he's an atheist is wrapped up in that word, which makes you wonder why his mom gave him that name, but she did, and so that's it. So if you're thinking of like reasons why you're thankful for your mom, be thankful she didn't give you that name, I guess. But so we've got Nabal, and what we know about Nabal is we know that he is a man of significant means. That it says here that he has 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. The V. Phillips Long, in his commentary on 1 Samuel, he says that shearing all of those animals would result in about 3 tons of wool. The picture here is that you have a guy who has more than enough, and not only does he have more than enough, but he could share. Like he has significant means, and he would be perfectly capable of helping someone who needed help. Remember, David's on the run and he needs help. It's kind of setting that stage. Then you've also got the fact that it says that he's a Calebite. And he's a Calebite. And the reason why the author wants us to see this is that there's 2 factions in Judah at the time. There is Israel, and then there's Judah. So there's the nation's kind of split into 2 factions. It's 2 factions of Israel, not Judah. And in the faction of Judah would have the Calebites, and David's group, the people of Judah. And so the idea there is he wants you to realize that Nabal and David, that they have a geographic proximity which would make them close relationally. And if you don't think that matters, I would just say, what happens when you're out like on vacation and you see someone from Springfield, Missouri? Like there's a closeness that you feel to that person because of your geographic relationship. So what the author's trying to do is painting a picture that you've got this man who's a fool, who has plenty. You've got David who's on the run, who's in need. This guy has a lot. There's a closeness there. Surely this guy would help David. Surely this guy, when seeing David's need, is willing to do what it might take to help out David. This is what David thinks, and so what David does is he sends word to Nabal. And he sends word to Nabal, and this is what he says. He sends his men to Nabal, essentially asking for help, and he says, go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And thus you shall greet him, peace be to you and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm. They missed nothing at all while they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David. So David reaches out to him graciously. He reaches out to him graciously and says pretty much in essence, he's like, hey, it's a feast day. You've got a lot. My guys are on the run. Not only are they on the run and you have a lot, but when they were taking care of the sheep, my 600 men who were armed, like they protected your guys. Do you think you would be willing to maybe like give something to us to spare? It's kind of cool because you get this picture of David in this moment where he's he's dual shepherding. That he's shepherding the shepherds, he's taking care of the people who are taking care of sheep, that he doesn't have to do that. But then you also see that David feels this pull, this urge to take care of the people who have attached themselves to him. There are 600 people right now who have attached themselves to David, saying in essence, if you're going to go on the run, we're going to come with you. We're going to be with you. We're going to stand alongside of you. And David, he feels a responsibility to them to say, hey, I need to take care of them. So he's looking for a way to take care of his people. We know that he really did take care of these guys too, that a little bit later on in the text, it says that David's men formed a wall of protection around Nabal's servants. That this is something they didn't have to do. Mind you, they were in need. They were in need and they were more powerful than Nabal. So if they wanted to, they could have just taken over, but instead they chose to protect them. And so he sends word to Nabal, it's a feast day. Surely there is something that you can give to help me and my men. But I would remind you Nabal's name. His name is Fool. And the way that he responds to David shows that he very much lives up to the name. This is how Nabal answers. He answers David's servant saying, "Who's David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I've killed for my shearers and give it to men who come from I don't know where?" So David's young men turned away and came back and told them all of this. Now, it's not that he said no. He has every right to say no. You could argue that he didn't ask David to protect his men. That's true. Like he didn't. He just did. But there are some bears you don't poke. And one of the people that you want to be careful with is the guy who defeated Goliath, who's on the run, who's probably just a little on edge, right? And there's a way to say no and be gracious. And then there's a way to say no and be foolish. And what you see that he says no in a way that could only be defined as foolish. I mean, look at how strong he comes against David. Like, first off, you see he says, who is David? Well, he knows who David is. You know how we know how he knows who David is? Because he knows who his dad is. Who is his son? What he's saying, and we know that people know who David is, that when David is in Philistine country 2 chapters ago, the Philistines know who David is. The Philistines know David. He's the guy who they sang the song about. So surely this guy, Nabal, who is of David's tribe, would have a decent idea of who David is. And then you see the phrase, son of Jesse. That when you look at 1 Samuel, every time that phrase is used to talk about David, it's always meant to be pejorative. It's always meant to be a little bit of a diss, that it's a slight. And so what he's doing is he's saying, who's David? Who's the son of Jesse? What does it matter? What is this guy even doing? Surely he's not that important. But then in like the ultimate diss that what Nabal says, is he says that line, there are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. What Nabal's saying is he's saying David should have never left Saul. He's saying that David really, Saul's the king. That Saul's why did he even think, that is stupid. Why would he do that? And so what Nabal's doing is he's poking a bear, but he thinks it's a chipmunk. So the word gets back to David. Word gets back to David that Nabal said no. Not only did he say no, but he said it in this way. And David, being a man he's not one of those guys who's all bark and no bite. Like he's a guy who can do what he needs to do. And so word gets back to David, and we see David, an example of David. We don't have the verses behind me, but it's an example of the best of men being men at best. That he hears the slight and he gets mad and he looks to his men, and there's 600 of them, and he says, all right, 200 of you stay back with the luggage, 400 strap on your swords, we're going to go kill everyone in Nabal's house. So 400 men, they strap on their swords and they head to Nabal's house with the intention of saying, I'm killing everyone. Now, I remind you, last week we talked about how David prayed 4 times about a decision. He didn't pray about this one. And no commentator would say that David was right in what he was doing either. But David has been slighted, he's frustrated, and now all of his dudes have got swords, and it's about ready to go down. And right as David is getting ready to shed a lot of innocent blood, Abigail comes on the scene. And when Abigail comes on the scene, she comes on the scene like a mom. Because what do moms do when they come on the scene? They make everything better. And this is what she does. She comes on the scene and she makes everything better. Look at what she does. You see it in verse 18. It says, then Abigail made haste, took 200 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already prepared. I'm sure that Nabal didn't like that. 5 seahs of parched grain, 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on donkeys. And she said to her young men, go on before me. Behold, I come after you. But she did not tell her husband, Nabal. She's like empty in the cupboard, taking everything that she can take. Think, how do I stop this from happening? And I think the line's kind of funny where she doesn't tell Nabal. Because there are things that if I want it done, I don't ask my kids to do it. If I really need to clean something and it needs to look good, I need to do it. I don't need to teach them a lesson in that moment. Like this is one of those things where she's like, I can't tell this guy, he's an idiot. I'll just take care of this myself, because if he gets involved, things are going to get worse. And so she goes, she gets all this food, and she comes and meets David. And what I find so interesting is the way that David responds. That David's a man of war. David's a man who is he's strong, and he kind of can do what he wants. And I think that you get the picture here too, that he's maybe just at least a little bit stubborn. And Abigail comes and she says something to him, and we'll look at that in a moment. But before we get to what she says, I just want to look at how David responds to her. That David is dead set on killing everyone in Nabal's house, that everyone's got a sword. He's told people this is going to happen. And then Abigail comes, she says something to David, which we'll look at in a moment, but this is how the story ends. It says, and David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you, for you have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning, there would not have been left to Nabal so much as one male. Then David received from her hand what she brought him. And he said to her, go in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition. That David went from, there will not be one male left in this house, to, peace be with you. May the Lord's peace rest on your home. I mean, just think about you when you're stubborn. I know maybe not you would think about someone you know when they're stubborn. How hard is it to change your mind? And then just like imagine like the pressure that comes with telling people what you're going to do. Because then you almost have to do what you say, right? Especially when you're stubborn. Because if not, then you got to admit you're wrong. And here you have David completely change directions. And the question is why? What happened to make David do this about face? What brought him from not a male left to peace be with you? And the answer is that God used Abigail. That Abigail comes into the setting and makes everything better. And there's a lot that we can learn from her, even just as we deal with stubborn people, but I would say beyond even dealing with stubborn people, but just living our lives in a way that deals with all different types of people and all different types of seasons, that we can learn a lot from Abigail's character traits, that if we possess them, what we will find is like Abigail, peace will come to us. And I just want to look at a few of those character traits this morning as we consider what she said to David. And the first thing we see is that this is how she started the conversation. It says, when Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, my Lord, be the guilt." So the first thing we see Abigail do is that when she comes across David to bring him to a place where he puts peace on her home, is that she exhibited humility and grace. That she had humility and grace. And if you look at the way that she talked to David, it's really interesting. She comes to David, and it says that she bows before him. Now, I would just remind you, David is a fugitive on the run at this point. That sure, he's got a following and he's got a reputation, but he's a fugitive on the run. That the most powerful person in Israel wants to kill David at this point. That David's homeless, like he has nowhere to lay his head. She's married to a wealthy man who is a fool, but you kind of get the impression that he runs his house like a kingdom. And when you think of like wealthy women coming in the context of into contact with a fugitive, you don't get the impression they're going to bow very often. But she comes to David and she shows humility by bowing, by calling him Lord. And some of what she's doing here is she's saying, I know someday you're going to be king. And so I'm just going to go ahead and submit myself to your kingdom now. But for us, it's worth considering and worth thinking about isn't it interesting how a little bit of humility can de-escalate some of the most contentious circumstances? Just a little bit. Because there's a lot of ways that Abigail could have responded. She could have tried to run and she might have been able to get away. She could have tried to negotiate something. Surely she was skilled in some ways in that. She could have even gone to David and been like, "Hey, David, here's the deal. Why don't we kill Nabal and you spare my life?" She could have done that. But she doesn't. She shows humility, and because she shows humility, a circumstance that is highly contentious is de-escalated. And for us, just little phrases can go a long ways. This is a crazy one, but it's just, if you just say, "I was wrong," it's amazing what that'll do. It's amazing what will happen if you just say, "You know what, I had no idea. I am so sorry." Another one that works is, "What would you like me to do to make this right?" Just a little bit of humility. And what you find that it actually goes a long way. Now, some of you might be thinking, you're like, "Well, yeah, but what if I didn't do anything wrong?" And I would just point out, did Abigail do anything wrong? Is she the one who responded to David by calling him in? Is she the one who did that? No, it was her husband. Sometimes that's just what you do. A little bit of humility goes a long way. You also see her show grace. And what she says is, she says, okay, forgive Nabal by forgiving me. Which is ultimately, it's a picture of what Jesus does for us. That he forgave him and we get his life. He stands in the place for us. So it's a little bit of a picture of that. But it's also something that we can do when dealing with people who don't like someone. Is we can help teach people how to show people grace. That's what she's doing here. She exhibits humility and grace. But what I appreciate about her is that not only does she exhibit humility and grace, but she's also like honest about Nabal's flaws. Look at what she says after she takes the blame. She says, "Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal. For his name is, so is he." That's such a funny little verse. You should get that tattoo. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young man, my Lord, whom you had sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand. You see her use some honesty and wisdom. She has honesty and wisdom. She's honest about Nabal. It's funny because she's like, so his name's Nabal, and he is Nabal. He's an idiot. And it makes you, she's so aware of his flaws, kind of makes you wonder why she married him, right? And then you realize it's because he was rich, so it makes sense. But she goes and she sees this and she's honest. And here's what we learn from her, okay? Is that sometimes what we do with people we love is with people that we love, we think in the name of love, ignoring their flaws is being loving to them. When the reality is that it's not. That sometimes what we're doing when we ignore the flaws of those we love is we're actually just enabling them to be foolish like Nabal. And here you have her saying, he is, what do you think? I see this with parents sometimes, where they've got a child maybe who's going down a bad path. And instead of dealing with the path that your child's going down or being honest about the path that they're on, what sometimes I see parents do is they just say, you know what, I'm going to push it aside. I'm going to ignore it. I don't want to ruffle any feathers. These things surely work themselves out. And you pretend like nothing's wrong. And the problem with that is that when you pretend like nothing's wrong, it doesn't change the fact that something's wrong. We also do this with people that we love who don't know Jesus. People in our lives who don't have a relationship with Jesus, a saving relationship with Jesus where they put their faith in him. And what we do is we just think to ourselves, well, it'll probably be all right. Or we think, I don't want to say something because that'd be weird. And we say, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm just not gonna think about it. And the problem is that doesn't change the circumstance. That not thinking about it, not acknowledging it, not being willing to do something about it, we think we're showing love by doing nothing, but the reality is what we can learn here from Abigail is that there's also something loving about saying, yeah, this needs to change. Yeah, this is wrong. Yeah, there needs to be something happening here. That she's honest with David. It's not just her grace. It's not just her humility that causes David to turn. It's also the honest statement that she says here about Nabal. And then she uses a lot of wisdom. And you see that wisdom in that phrase, blood guilt. That what's tied up in that is this idea that what she's saying to David is she's saying, David, if you do this, the innocent blood that you will shed will follow you. That you'll harm people who you have no intention of harming, who did you no wrong. Your issue's with Nabal, not with his household. Everyone else there is innocent. They didn't make the decision. It was Nabal that made it. And she's constantly pointing David towards his inevitable kingdom, saying in essence, this Nabal thing is a blip on the radar screen when you are king. But if you do something stupid now, it will follow you when you are there. And she's showing him wisdom. And is that not true of our lives too? That we need people in our lives like Abigail who can look at us and say, if you do, this might not seem like that big of a deal right now, but it will catch up with you in 10 years. This might not seem like that big of a deal, but here's the thing. You're saying you're mad at this person, but really, are you mad about something else? Are you taking out your wrath on people who don't deserve it? That she helps him see that. And then finally what she does is she brings David to a place where he can be reminded that he needs to trust God's salvation. When you think of Israel at this time, the point of Israel at this time was that someday God was going to save them through David, by David being the king that they needed. And Abigail, in her grace, reminds David that is coming, which is probably something that he needs to hear while he's on the run. Look at what she says to him in verse 28. She says, "For the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If men rise up and pursue you and seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out from the hollow of a sling. And when my Lord has done to my Lord, or the Lord has done to my Lord, according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you as prince over Israel, my Lord shall cause no grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, for my Lord working salvation for himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant." Remind you that David right now is not king. Right now, David, probably you could argue that he couldn't be further away from the throne. I mean, he's in a spat with a wealthy landowner. Like, that doesn't feel like being king. That he's got 600 outlaws following him. But he's also got a promise that he's holding on to. That someday God will use him as the king of Israel to be his instrument of salvation. And in some ways, what Abigail is saying to David is also what the Lord says to us as we think about Jesus. I mean, think about it. We don't have a date when he's coming back. It's something we're just waiting for. It's something we're just hoping that's going to happen. And if we were to be really honest, sometimes it feels like it's not going to, doesn't it? But sometimes we look around and we think, gosh, is this really like the thing? But like David in Israel's hope in David's salvation, for us, there's an element of us as we follow Jesus where everything inside of us has to hope that someday he will fulfill his promises to us. We learn from Abigail what it looks like to follow Jesus by the way that she responded to David. She bowed before him. In the same way we're to bow before Jesus. That we submit ourselves to him saying, God, I am at your mercy. Whatever you say, I will do. Please withhold your wrath from me. And we're also learn from her because in the same way that she points David to his salvation, we point ourselves to the salvation that Jesus offers us, asking ourselves, is this where my hope rests? And this is what we need to consider this morning as we pray. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we trust you. And God, we look to you this morning, hopeful. But I pray that we would evaluate our lives. And really, we would use Abigail's example to evaluate two things. One, are we submitted to you? Like, are we? If you were to look at our lives, the metaphor of our lives, would the metaphor of our lives be one where we are bowed before Jesus saying, whatever he wants, I will do? And I would also ask, as we consider that metaphor of our lives and the metaphor of our hearts, is our heart hoping for the day when he returns? Is there something inside of us that when we consider all that's wrong, that we put our trust in the fact that someday he will return and make it right? God, if it's not, I pray that in this moment, as we're before you in your presence, I pray that we would put our faith in you. But God, if you don't have all of our lives, then I pray this morning as people consider that, I pray that people would give all of their lives to you. That if there are things they're holding back on, I pray that this morning that they would see that and they would give it to you. And I also pray this morning that we would evaluate our hope, that we'd evaluate our trust, that we'd ask ourselves, why do we think things are going to get better? And if the answer isn't Jesus, then it's the wrong answer. Help us to put our hope in what he's going to do. And if we fall short, God, help us to change. And so, God, we come to you and we thank you. We thank you for all that you are. God, we thank you for all that you do, and we put our faith in Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen.
Thank you for watching us on YouTube today. We hope that the content that you heard helped you know Jesus better.
Also, don't forget to click subscribe and to click the bell icon so that you'll get notified every time our channel drops a new video.
If you would like to partner with us and what God is doing here at New Life, there are 3 ways that you can give.
You can give by mailing a check to the church, you can give by going to giving.nlspringfield.com, or you can text 84321 with the amount that you'd like to give.
And if you would like to connect with us in any other way, you can visit us at nlspringfield.com, click on the Connect tab, and we will get back to you as soon as we can.
See you next week.